What up? What up? Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. First of all, we're having a two-time guest on today's show. They have been on this podcast before, and I think it's a great testament to the fact that you can run multiple campaigns if you want to on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And by the way, if you've been listening to this podcast, you're like, what the heck is this show about? And we talk a lot about Kickstarter, Indiegogo, e-commerce, equity crowdfunding. And really, I think the common thread between all of this is like, how do we get one of your projects off the ground? Now, that could be a project, an idea you have in the head. That could be a prototype that you've been working on. That could be something new that you want to bring to the world. But I think that of all of the members of my community, the one thing that we all have in common is that we want to make meaning in the world. It's about more than just raising money. It's really about making meaning. It's about creating something that other people can use. It's about, making a little bit of a dent in the universe. And I think adding a bit of your flavor to that major recipe that we all kind of are working to make. So this is kind of my goal, is to help you do this. And the show is designed not only to share with you practical tips and tactics and resources and tools, strategies, things you got to do going forward, but also to kind of just share a little bit of inspiration, because it's so much easier to do something when you see someone else succeeding at that thing. You know what I mean? Maybe you're trying to do something, you're trying to learn how to bike ride, and you see someone who's able to learn that in a matter of a couple of weeks, and you do it, like, that's awesome. Or if you learn how to scuba dive and you see other people that are learning how to do it, it just gives you motivation, seeing other people get results. And I think that that's the big thing that is missing when it comes to crowdfunding, and why I started the podcast in 2015, man. This is exactly why I started it, and why I even got into the industry in 2012. It's like, we need to show people success stories, and we need to do it honestly and transparently, and literally just like pull back the hood for you to see how the engine works, to show you, I guess, step by step, if you want to put it that way, what goes into a successful campaign. Now, today's episode is with a creator that raised over $500,000, more than $591,000 on Kickstarter. And you're like, oh, this must be a super interesting tech product that has mass appeal. Dude, today's project is for a series of action figures. This is Beasts of the Mesozoic Tyrannosaur series action figures that raised $592,000 from more than 2,000 backers. Think about that. All this time, you might have been saying, oh, I'm not going to be able to launch a campaign because, I don't know. Is my niche going to be big enough? This is for action figures that are based out of dinosaurs. That is so cool. That is so cool. And it's so niche. The more niche you can be, the better, in my opinion. So it's kind of like that saying that the riches are in the niches. Really good saying. And to me, that speaks true. So today's episode, number one, you're going to hear what actually went into a $500,000 plus campaign in order to have that kind of a mega raise. Number two, you're going to learn about how you can actually pull off like a niche fundraising or a niche crowdfunding campaign, something that's a little bit more specific, something that's a little bit of a smaller audience maybe out there. You're also going to learn today a little bit about the overall Kickstarter marketplace and kind of how that works, what goes into a successful project. And finally, I think if nothing else, taking away a little bit of inspiration that you can do this too, and it can be for your project in your category. And maybe you don't have action figures that you're making, but it just shows you that it really doesn't matter. Go back and listen to the archives of this show. There are so many examples of success, so many different types of projects, so many different types of products and people coming from different walks of life, from the United States, from the UK, around the world, that have been successful with crowdfunding. And my goal here is just to show you, man, just to show you, you can do this thing too. I know that you can do it. So if you want to learn a little bit more, first of all, I really recommend checking out my book, The Kickstarter Launch Formula. That book is available on Audible. You can check that out at crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. That link is crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. In addition, I put together a class for you to share with you the straightest path to success in order to smash your goal on Kickstarter. If you're interested in attending that class, I'm going to give you a link for that. And you should only do this if you're super serious. This isn't for someone who's looking for a 2-minute long short Instagram video or a YouTube video that's going to try to cram everything into 1 minute and 30 seconds that explains crowdfunding. No, this is a serious class. You should treat this as though you're almost attending a lecture, but a little bit more interesting than that, because obviously I'm the teacher, right? So I hate boring lectures. This is more of fun, passion, showing you what actually works to get you results. and to share with you just the nuts and bolts of doing this, as well as some of the more sophisticated and advanced strategies that you can use in order to smash your goal on Kickstarter. So if you're interested in learning about that, you can go to this link and you can register for that class. That link is crowdwdcrux.com/masterclass. Again, that link is crowdcrux.com/masterclass. crowdwdcrux.com/masterclass. Okay, that being said, let's dive into today's podcast episode and learn how this creator was able to attract more than 5,000 in funding from more than 2,000 backers. It's coming up right after this. If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured, I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist. fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately. When it comes to this project, how does this really stand out? Like, why did you want to launch a whole new line here of action figures?
It was something that I had intended to do early on. I wanted to do Tyrannosaurs and Tyrannosaurus Rex, but it was a bit too expensive and complicated for me to do to start with. So I had to start off with something more conservative, like the Raptor series, and then build up to the Tyrannosaurs. If the first two series hadn't gone as well as they did, then I wouldn't be able to get to this point. So basically, being able to have the Raptor series and the Ceratopsian series funded and successful has allowed me to do the Tyrannosaur series now. Yeah, it just seemed like the next step in the process.
So, how do your friends and families kind of react when you tell them you're doing these types of projects and you're raising, with this campaign at least 300K plus? Like, how do they react to that?
I don't think they really understand it. I mean, I have some friends that understand it from the industry, and they're super excited about it. But like as far as like family, I think that it might be a little more than they understand as far as how it works. So, for example, I've told my dad about it. I try to explain it to him. I can tell that he's not on the internet at all, so I can tell it's a little difficult for him to envision. But I say, hey, I raised 185,000 today, and he's like, oh, good, that's really good, and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm expecting. So, but 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 yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things like people that make toys that I know that I'm associated with. I mean, they understand what's involved and how unlikely something like this is to happen, and it's so I can I can share that with them, and I can share it with the fans who follow me and things like that, and that's plenty. And everybody's very encouraging and very supportive, so that's really cool.
Are there any moments that leap out to you having done these other projects when, you had an experience with a fan who either really liked what you were doing or said nice things or, even went step beyond that? Have you ever had an experience like that as a creator dealing with your fans?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of people have been very appreciative and expressed their gratitude in a lot of different ways, and how maybe it inspired them. Or a lot of people, like on Instagram, for example, will post these really cool photos of the figures, and some people repaint them. Things like that, I think, are great because it inspires people to be creative and inspires them to create their own stories about these animals and things like that, and basically engage more with something from natural history, and kind of just have a broader understanding of the other creatures that have existed here and on this planet. I get tagged in things a lot for that sort of thing, or they'll post on my Facebook wall. There's also fan art. People do fan art sometimes. I mean, I love all of it, and I always encourage it if people are inspired by a particular design or particular figure, and they say, "Hey, can I use this for a drawing, or can I use it for you know a photo or whatever?" I'm always on board with it. I say, "Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's here for." so
Yeah.
so yeah, that it's always cool because it's really just as much about natural history as it is about art and self-expression and things like that. And I want to encourage both of those things.
Do you feel like that's different at all when the first time you're doing it, you don't even know if it's gonna resonate, right? And you just kinda put something out there and it manages to resonate. But now it's like you have a spotlight on you a little bit. Like, do you feel that pressure at all when you're coming out with something new?
I mean, there's pressure to deliver for everything that I commit to doing. I mean, obviously, there's, when you're dealing with manufacturing, there's going to be a lot of people in the pipeline and a lot of things that could potentially go wrong, or, there's been plenty of delays along the way. But I guess what it comes down to is I just have to kind of learn from past experience to trust myself to figure it out. And so far, I have.
Yeah, it sounds like it's one of those things where you just kinda have to run it and gun it and just go with it, and, if you have,
Yeah,
an intuition, right, then you just kinda follow it.
yeah. There's a lot about that, and I think the attention doesn't really get to me. Surprisingly, because I'm very introverted, but it's really a matter of me living up to my own expectations, I think, and I'm very hard on myself. I'm never really impressed with what I'm doing, so I'm not feeling too much pressure from other people. I tend to put a lot of pressure on myself already.
Got it, yeah. One of the things I was looking at when it comes to some of the notes that you had sent over, some of your realizations, this idea of preparing prototypes for a campaign. Why is that so important to you? Why is that something that's important part of the process?
That's how I would like to see it done if I were backing a project. I'm not super impressed by, say, CG renderings and things like that, because it's not tangible and it's hard for me to relate to it in a physical sense. I feel like having a tangible physical object that's in real space, people can imagine it more in their own space that way. And uh, I'm sure it's totally acceptable to do it the other way, where you just show digital renderings. But for me personally, that's what I prefer, and that's what I prefer to show. I feel like it's important and adds like another layer of commitment by showing that you've gone that far with it before you're even funded. And luckily, I'm able to do that because I'm already selling figures from the previous line, so I can fund the development of the prototypes before we even get to the crowdfund.
And when you're making those prototypes, are those basically what you're taking photos of and video of leading up to the project? Are there like many iterations that you go through before you get to that point?
Now there's only one prototype for each figure. I barely have enough time to do that much, but we don't really get to have multiples until they go into some form of production, and then I get samples from the factory, and then I can really move them around and have videos and things like that.
Very cool, very cool. One of the other things, that you mentioned that was really important is this idea of going hard on different platforms. And I was kind of curious what you meant by that.
I post regularly on three different. Well, I guess technically it's three different platforms, but I have four accounts on three platforms. So I have two Facebook accounts. I have like my regular page, and then I have my business page, but then I also have an Instagram, and I have a Twitter. And I know I'm not familiar with half of the social media that's out there right now, but that's about all I can handle is that much. But I do put a lot into it, and I try to make each post informative and interesting. And basically, whenever I post something, I want to earn the people's attention. I don't want them to feel like they waste their time looking at it, so I try to make it worth their while. And people seem to appreciate that.
Got it. When you're doing this and you're coming up with these ideas, is it just like showcasing elements of the prototype? Is it you trying to tell a story with your post? Or are you just kind of, hey, this is what I'm doing, what I'm working on? Like, what do you usually share on social media?
A lot of it is process. Like I might show some sculpting progress or some painting progress, or I just built a new prototype, or maybe I'm showing a finished painted prototype. Maybe there's package art that I can reveal. It's just basically it's just all the stuff that's kind of happening in real time as the project continues, and people get to see the entire process. And it kind of is a story if you step back from it and look at it for the course of several months or so. And you know the people that follow me regularly, they kind of make connections between, okay, you just showed the the sculpting process for this figure a few weeks ago, and now we see it built and starting to be painted. So they're sort of following these prototypes before the Kickstarter even launches. So when they see them on the Kickstarter, they already have an association. At least a lot of the fans do. There's plenty of new people that come to the Kickstarter as well, but there's a certain percentage of those people that are people who follow me from social media.
Why do you think that process is so interesting for people? Because I think the average creator is like, why would anyone want to see that? Right. Like, just kind of what's going into it. Seems kind of boring, right? Why do you think people are interested by that?
I think it sort of demystifies the way that certain art is made. Like it's not something that is exclusive to special people. It's something that has to be thought about and built over a period of time. And and the steps involved are relatively simple. They just take a lot of time, and that's kind of what I want to show. And in some ways, maybe seeing the whole process for each one of these figures will inspire people to not get discouraged. When they just see all of a sudden, like if it's a bigger company, you don't see this any of the process. You just see the final figures, and they're being solicited. All of a sudden, there it is. It's right there. It's already done, and it kind of has that sense when you see it presented that way. It kind of makes it feel like only special people can make these. So by me showing the entire process from start to finish, I kind of like show them like, hey, this is something that you have to, you know, put a lot of steps into, put a lot of time into, just like anything else that you normally do in your own life. And it just happens to be, a dinosaur figure. It could be anything. But basically, I think it's a way of relating, and people understand the process better, and then they can maybe somehow relate that to something that they want to make.
So a lot of the people that participate are also creators or interested kind of themselves in that. When you're putting out these posts, like, are you using any tools to help with that or to create these, or is it just all just like raw kind of photos you're sharing?
No, I don't do anything fancy. I just take some photos and I upload them to my computer, and I just type whatever's relevant that comes to mind. I'm not a social media guy at all. I'm just trying to communicate with people. That's all I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that a lot of people will find that very relatable, just because it is so hard, like, to look professional, and it's kind of encouraging just to know that you can put out elements of the process and still get people excited, right,
Hmm.
about what it is that you're doing.
Absolutely, and I think that if that was the norm, I don't think it would hurt anything. I think that we don't necessarily need to have things only shown to us in the finished form. It's actually much more interesting to see something happen over a course of time. I mean, isn't that why people love children? Because you get to see them grow up and all that. So it's those associations, I think, are stronger when you see something developing into the final thing. So
Yeah, I think in a weird way, it makes people also value that art or that creativity a lot more, right? Because when you hear about, for example, like the painting and what went into a painting and that element of that guy's life that it comes from, it's like, oh, okay, this is actually pretty freaking cool. Versus just like a painting on the wall that's like, oh, it's just another painting, right? So
yeah,
context makes it
yeah.
seem more valuable in that way.
Absolutely. I remember when I was a kid, and we all were all kids. We had our toys or whatever. I mean, those toys, they just existed. They didn't come from anywhere. You just went to the store and you got them. And there was some sort of amazing factory or some sort of magical place that made these things, and they just happened. And you didn't really think about it, but you could definitely never make those things yourself because you weren't that person. You weren't those people. and everything that I would acquire when I was a kid, it just seemed like it was made by people who know more than me, and I will never be that. And um, now we have a way to communicate with everybody and say, hey, this is how it's done. You could totally do this too if you really want to. And I think that's, that's a really cool thing, and maybe might inspire people to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise tried to do.
It's interesting to me how much you want to deliver value, but also inspire people. Like that seems to be a part of your company values. It's really interesting.
Absolutely.
Is there a reason for that?
I am of the thinking that we're all born creative. We by our evolutionary path, we've developed creative minds. Not everybody ends up being an artist necessarily, but a lot of people have creativity. Maybe they just apply it to problem solving or something like that. But we're all creative people, and if that isn't encouraged, it can be forgotten about. And I think that creativity will unlock a certain potential that you might have to something that you're really good at. Maybe you're not getting paid for it, but it does help you feel more fulfilled. And I think it's an important aspect to try to reach people about their creativity, no matter what it looks like or what it ends up being. I think it's important.
Yeah, I love that, man. That's so true. For those people out there that do want to turn their passion into profit and earn income or monetize that creativity, do you have any advice for them and why you think, what you've done has really resonated in that way?
Well, the funny thing about it is, I could have never gotten to this place if my priority was to make a profit. I think what made it work was that I looked at my industry, and I tried to figure out what was missing, and what is it that people would like to have that they can't have right now. And it was always obvious to me ever since I've been working in the industry that it was dinosaurs. And it sounds so simple. It sounds silly for me to even hear myself say it, but like there really wasn't much for it. And even the stuff that is out there is based on movie dinosaurs, and it's not really based on scientific findings so much, or natural history or things like that, like realistic things. And I felt really strongly that that was a problem that needed to be solved, and that would bring value to the industry. I love the toy industry. I love collectibles industry. I'm always interested in seeing what more can be done in that industry. And if I can contribute to it in a positive way, that's what I want to do. And the best thing I can do is present something that I think is lacking. And I have a genuine interest in this area. So I feel like if I don't at least try, then in some ways I'm
Yeah.
kind of letting the industry down. So I think the important thing is just to kind of think about your values. What are the things that are important to you, and what do you feel is missing from the market based on your own values? And then you know try and see if there's an interest there from people, see if people want that sort of thing. And then eventually, if you are connecting with enough people, then you can make profit. But the profit idea doesn't come until, I think, later on. It's more about, what can I do to serve the market? What can I do to serve the industry? And then once you nail that down, then you can, work with that.
Yeah, I think it also makes you feel a lot more confident about getting the word out and pushing hard when you really have put like your heart and soul into your product. You've done everything possible. It's like it's almost an injustice not to really promote the heck out of it. So I think that's also plays into it as well.
Yeah, yeah. I always try to promote as much as I can. I feel like the thing that I'm best for is just making the figures. Like that's the thing I'm best for. The promotion, I've got a handle on it, but I'm not great at it. I'm not great at social media. I wouldn't even say I'm great at like doing a lot of the business stuff, but I'm good at it. I'm good enough at it. So, it all serves the purpose of helping to get these figures to the people who want them. And that's enough motivation for me.
For the layman who is like, okay, I know you're saying you're not good at it, David, but you're obviously crushing it here, right? If they're like, okay, how do I really build anticipation the way that you do? Do you have any tips or advice on how to do it? Like, I get the thing about sharing the process. That makes a lot of sense on social media. What can you do to build anticipation? What are your thoughts on that?
It's very intuitive. I guess if you needed to see an example of it, I mean, it's probably been with us for a long time as far as like big movies. Like first you see a little bit of like an onset photo, and then you see a teaser for the teaser trailer, and then you see the teaser trailer, and it just builds and builds and builds, and like there's a certain build to anticipation, and but the thing is, I don't really have enough to work with to build it in that way. I'm like I just show what I have, and the project is building on its own anyway. So I'm just showing the steps, and then eventually it leads to something. Like if I were like a year out from my post that I'm sharing, like a lot of the larger companies, then I could plan more deliberately and proceed with a whole marketing plan or whatever. But the anticipation that I'm building, it's not that well thought out. I'm mostly just working with what I have.
Got it. So basically, be sharing elements of the process and not oversharing, but enough to the point where as you get closer and closer, a fuller picture should kind of come together. And then you go live and like the full thing is kind of unveiled almost.
Right. Now, I will say that when I'm getting close to a Kickstarter launch, I will hold some stuff back as an incentive for people to go to the Kickstarter page. There's not a whole lot that I'm holding back, but there should be enough to give them, something to be excited about when the day comes. You don't want to give everything away, but even leading up to that, I still show new things. Just there's just certain things that I'm like, okay, I'm going to save that for later. Or maybe there's projects like right now, there's several prototypes still in development. I know that I can show that progress during the Kickstarter as well, and that's interesting too. So they're like actually seeing things happen.
Do you think at all about pricing? Like, do you announce that at all, or do you ever bring that into conversation? You just kind of wait until you go live and they can kind of figure that out.
I think each time it was a little different. There's this balance between covering my costs, but also perceived value from the audience. Like you don't want to overprice when people are already used to buying certain types of collectibles. They're obviously going to compare what you're proposing to what they're used to buying. So there's that element I have to consider, and then I'll obviously have to consider how much it's going to cost me, and just try to get both of those things in sync with each other, and that's where my pricing ends up. And for this particular series, I was able to get pricing even right down to production pricing because I had digital files this time for the first time to send to China. So I had them print everything out and do the articulation. I sent them photos of the painted versions, and they gave me quotes for everything before the Kickstarter. So that was helpful, and I didn't want to announce my pricing until I had those quotes, and then all of the other figures will kind of fall in line between the two figures that I got pricing for. So that's how I did it this time.
Got it. One of the things I like that what you do is you really kind of play with curiosity a little bit. Like even with your stretch goals, right? You can see like certain dinosaurs are kind of blackened out. You can't really see what it is, right? So you do like have this natural intuition when it comes to making people curious, at least a little bit. And I think that plays a lot as well into building hype in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of forgot about that, but yeah, I I treat each one of these campaigns as an event, which to me seems like most people would do that when they do a Kickstarter. But basically, you want to hold people's attention for a whole month. I mean, that's a lot of people and a lot of attention. So you can't. I don't want to show everything all at once, and then they're done and they're moved on to the next thing. I want to give them reason to come back each day, and I post an update, at least one update a day, and like you said, I have some of the stretch goals in shadow, and then as more open up, then I reveal the next one, and there's more information about the other ones that have already been showed the design for, and maybe there's some new photos that pop up. There's like little things that I try to do each day that give people a reason to check in, and so I think that's important. I don't really think that's so much anticipation, but just uh, part of I guess a habit that you want to develop over the course of the month. People just used to, I'll check my email, I check this website, I'll check the Kickstarter, you know, just, as part of the routine, you want to give them a reason to keep coming back and checking in.
Got it. So one other quick question I had for you, just in understanding your experience here, is like you obviously kind of got a crash course in Kickstarter. You're getting a crash course in e-commerce. What is like to you comparison, or you know how does Kickstarter relate with e-commerce and like running an online store? Can they be compared at all? Like, what do you think about that question?
Well, the big difference to me is that Kickstarter doesn't, at least for me anyway, it doesn't include profits. Like I'm basically funding the items that I need to fund in order to fulfill the rewards. Now the profits don't actually happen until after I've fulfilled everything, and then I'm left with a certain amount of stock that I can sell afterwards, and that's where the e-commerce comes in after the rewards are fulfilled. So to me, it's two different things, like with funding versus selling, basically.
Okay, and sort of one, they kind of work hand in hand almost to a degree. One enables the other, and you also, I'm sure, learn a bit while you're doing the Kickstarter about your audience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I just feel like the Kickstarter is much more personal, and e-com is more people finding me and deciding to purchase something that's already made. Yeah, where Kickstarter is like, it's more of a, it has a lot more to do with trust and being a part of something that wouldn't otherwise happen. So like in my mind, it's two very different things. That, I mean, you're dealing with money either way, but you definitely can't have the ecom part without the Kickstarter part.
Yeah, so different motivations behind it, different types of people that are backing it makes a lot of sense. Have you thought, or I don't know if you have, if you plowed into any kind of offline pursuits, whether that's like retail or some of these other things?
Not really. I'm still working on that. There's still a lot of potential for online retailers, and I have quite a few already that I work with, and a lot of them are international. But as far as like brick and mortar stores, from my experience working at NECA and seeing what they had to do to get into like Walmart and Target and things like that, Toys R Us when they were around, I mean, it's pretty complicated, and it seems like you probably need a pretty regular flow of product coming in, which I don't have. I'm still just running this by myself at this point, and I feel like that's something that I would have to work towards. Maybe a few years from now, I can look into that.
Very cool. So my final question for you is, you've mentioned BackerKit the last time. Do you have any other tools that you would recommend that people look into that are looking to embark on the Kickstarter process?
BackerKit, I guess it's one of several pledge managers that you could use after Kickstarter. I'm not sure which ones are best, but I've been pretty happy with BackerKit. As far as the other important thing that I would suggest is finding a good fulfillment company to work with, because most likely, like if you're doing something this size on this scale, you're going to end up with a lot of product that you can't store in your home, or that you wouldn't want to ship out to everybody. So I work with a fulfillment partner, Fulfill Right. They're in New Jersey, here where I live, and they do all my warehousing, they do all my shipping and packing and everything. So that's been essential. I mean, I couldn't do any of this without that. There's a lot of fulfillment companies, and I would say, for anybody trying to do something like this, try to find somebody who's not too hard for you to drive to in case something needs your attention. I found that to be useful.
Where can people go to learn more about the project?
But you can go to creative-beast.com. That's my regular website. I have everything there. There's links to my social media on there. There's also a link to the Kickstarter on there as well. That's my main place.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate all these tips, your thoughts on the creative process, how to tease the campaign and get people excited. Really appreciate it. And good luck with your campaign.
I appreciate it, Saul. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman, hailing in at the moment from Brooklyn, New York. I recently moved actually to Miami, but I do come back to New York every once in a while to meet friends. And also just I love it here and I got stuff doing when it comes to business in the city. So hailing in from New York, wherever you are in the world, I hope that you took some value out of today's show and also that you're taking some action, man. You're taking some action. It's not enough just to download all this information in your head and it makes you feel good. It makes you feel inspired. Like that's great. But now do something with that energy. Don't just let that stand there and just feel great throughout the day. Like really do something. And that could be as simple as just writing down a couple of things you maybe have to do or have to learn about next week. It could be as simple as maybe sketching out your first prototype, or if you already got the prototype, learning a little bit about what you got to do next in order to get this thing out there in the hands of other people. Really just start taking some action. The only way that we're ever going to get this product out there to bunches of people around the world and build a global brand out of your work, the only way that's ever going to happen is if we take a little bit of action. So that being said, if you're in that process of just wanting to uncover and discover what goes into one of these successful campaigns, first of all, I'm going to give you a link, which you should certainly join my newsletter. So I put out a weekly crowdfunding newsletter where I share actionable tips, advice, news, things that I think you should know when it comes to what's working right now with crowdfunding and also with equity crowdfunding and Kickstarter and Indiegogo. You can go to the link I'm about to mention and you can join it there. You can go to crowdcrux.com, crowdcrux.com/newsletter. That's crowdcrux.com/newsletter, crowdcrux.com/newsletter. Really great place. And it's also free. And I'll send it straight to your inbox whenever I come out with new things that I'm discovering in the niche. Second of all, if you want to kind of get that straightest path to success in order to smash your goal on Kickstarter, and you really want to level up your campaign, I'm not just talking about a little bit. You're like, you know what? I want some free tips. I want a newsletter, right? I want a couple of links I can check out in depth, logically going through, breaking this entire process down, sharing with you exactly what is going to work in order to smash your goal, and really getting very nitty gritty, pulling this process apart, demystifying the whole thing. If you are ready for that level of analytics, analysis, understanding, clarity, and pulling back the curtain for this process, if you are ready to commit your time in learning that, if you're ready to put in the energy, I got a free workshop class for you, which you can attend. And I hope that you bring your A game. And my God, you got to bring a notebook. You got to take some notes with this because there's a lot of information I'm going to be sharing with you. Go and check out this link, crowdcrux.com/masterclass. That link is crowdcrux.com/masterclass. crowdcrux.com/masterclass. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.